Hey guys, my name is Neel and welcome to Neel Workshop Zone. So in this episode we are going to be talking about objects. Well, we're also going to be talking about events, but first let's talk about objects. So in my previous JavaScript episodes I talked about a lot of stuff regarding JavaScript like scopes, etc. So if you haven't checked it out, I recommend checking out those episodes. But in this episode we have been talking about objects. So without further ado, let's talk about it. So if you do have some experience with other programming languages like for example, let us assume Python, Java, programming languages like that. Well, the definition for object or the reason why you use an object in those programming languages is the same as why we use objects in JavaScript. So if you do have some experience in those programming languages, then you don't really need an introduction for objects in JavaScript. But if you're a beginner, then I can tell you what an object is. So to understand an object, let me take a real life example. Let us assume a phone is an object, right? Because a phone is an object. So let us assume that this phone has methods and properties. Obviously every phone has methods and properties, but imagine properties are the specifications for the mobile. So the properties of a mobile, you can say, is that the color of the mobile is red and the model is of a company of Redmi H2, and let us assume that the phone's height is about 6.2 inches. So those are the properties of an object, right? And on the other hand, you have methods, which are basically the stuff that the object can do. So for example, you can use it to call, you can use it to message, you can use it for browsing the internet, and you can do a lot of stuff on that. So in a similar manner, an object in JavaScript is the same thing. It's a data type which has methods and properties. And just like variables, how we can store values in variables, you can use objects to store values in them as well. But we mostly use it to define, like I said, an object. So for example, let us assume let phone is equals to mi, right? So this you can say is basically an object. So now let us assume that you want to write multiple values in JavaScript. Well, when you think about it logically, we can use a lot of other stuff like variables, but for variables you have to use either arrays or lists to include multiple values. But for an object, you can use multiple values to store values in this object. So for example, let me assume an object const phone. Let me take the previous example. I can just write in the bracket model is equals to mi, color is red, height is 6.2 inches, etc. So in an object you can basically include properties about the object as well. So that is basically about how an object works, what its methods are and properties are. Methods are basically the way that the object functions, and the properties are the properties of the function. So let us also assume that you want to leave spaces or gaps for the amount of properties you want to include in your object. So if I just left 2 lines and wrote something and left 2 lines and wrote something, it still counts because line breaks and sentence gaps are not really counted in JavaScript objects. So now let's talk about events, because objects, even though it's a pretty useful thing, there isn't much scope to talk about it. But when we're programming and writing practical episodes, then it's really useful. So now let us talk about events. So events are basically stuff that is supposed to happen when you run a web page, like stuff that will obviously happen. So for example, a browser loading, or you interacting with an element, or you clicking on a button, all of this can be called as events. Now usually for an event like this you won't really care, but when you're writing a web page, and sometimes you need to make sure that some stuff happens when an event occurs. So for example, let us assume you want to create a website where let us assume when a person randomly opens a website, it has to show a pop-up of some kind. And it only happens if the browser is fully loaded, or like if the website is fully open. In that case, you can use an event trigger so that it triggers that function to happen when the event occurs. So you can just write it something like, you can write the name of the element, event, and you can write in double brackets what that event could be. And you can add some code to it, and depending on that you can change the elements. So just in a similar way, that is how basically events work. Now there are a lot of different types of events, and we'll go about it pretty simply. You have on tick, on change, on also. There's a lot of different types of events like that, but we'll talk about them in the next episode. And because in this episode basically you don't really need to do all of that, I'll tell you an example of one of it. So on click is basically the type of event that happens when you click on an object. In the same way you have stuff such as when you hover over an element, it leads to a specific type of event. So in similar ways there are different events, but it's not really that big, so we'll talk about it in the next episode. But for now, that's basically about objects and events. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out any new videos. And that's all folks, see you in the next one. Bye bye.